Hello and welcome back. I firstly want to thank my last week viewers who found the first episode informative and interesting enough to sit down and watch it integrally. Today's trial is a sensitive one in that it presents some aspects which in today's society might be construed as homophobic or obscene. So if you're prudish or take offense at historical cultural events, then perhaps it's wise not to watch further. My aim is to present you a legal case and to do so in a manner that is primarily informative but also impartial. In order to understand the whole trial, we have to first delve into its context. The story of the trial starts about 30 years before the actual trial, when Oscar Wilde decided to create an artistic version of a biblical narrative. The biblical narrative, with which you might be familiar, is about Salome, the daughter of Herod, who asked for the head of John the Baptist as a reward for a dance she performed for Herod's guests. Oscar Wilde added a touch of sensuality to this narrative by imagining Salome as the femme fatale, the ultimate overt female sexuality, who performed the so-called the Dance of the Seven Veils. Oscar's play was written in 1891 but was banned in London until 1908, so roughly for about 20 years. The reason for the ban was to do with the fact that the English officials and politicians of the time sought to dissociate the nation from this prominent writer, Oscar Wilde, who at the time was imprisoned in Reading, actually, for gross indecency after publishing a book in which he detailed the affection between two men. The book is called The Picture of Dorian Gray. It's widely available now and I strongly recommend the book. Homosexuality and any literary reference or publication was strictly banned but also criminalized. Salome was played by Maud Allen, a leading dancer of the time, who was born in Toronto and whose brother happened to be a convicted murderer. This tiny detail will become very important later. London audiences described Maud as an artistic and graceful dancer, an Edwardian sex symbol with mesmerizing effect and allure. Although Maud was financially successful, it was rumored that the wife of the British Prime Minister of the time, Margot Asquith, had a lesbian affair with her and also paid her rent in one grand mansion from Regent's Park. Maud has even danced in front of Queen Alexandra and Edward VII, but despite her sensuality and lasciviousness, she was a serious and internationally celebrated artist. Perhaps this success brought her jealousy, in particular from Lord Alfred Douglas, which was one of Oscar Wilde's former lover. He published a negative review in a magazine which accused Allen of not being a genuine dancer at all and for having a brother who is a murderer. Maud Allen was really caught in this crossfire between two of Wilde's former lovers, one of them being Alfred Douglas and the other one Robbie Ross. In brief, after Oscar Wilde died, Robbie Ross tried to restore Oscar Wilde's literary reputation, while Douglas tried to dissociate himself from Wilde. When Ross endorsed a biography of Wilde detailing the contents of a private letter, De Profundis, this is an exceptional read if you have some time in your hands, sent by Wilde to Douglas while in prison, Douglas launched a libel action. The libel action failed, but it gave rise to a series of public allegations on both sides, which were meant to ruin each other's reputation. Douglas has even demanded the Prime Minister of the time, Asquith, to publicly denounce Ross. Instead, Asquith signed a letter in his support alongside 300 well-known political figures. This provoked Douglas into a greater rage, and in turn started writing polemical verses about lamenting that the country is rife with people of progressive views and sodoms, homosexuals, and so on and so forth. So we kind of can wrap up the artistic context of the time, and we move on 15 years on to the political context. First World War brought about horrific atrocities, and some of them being we had German naval bombardments of coastal English towns. We had the air raids by the Zeppelin airships, and literally countless casualties. At the same time, the English public was noticing close links that members of the upper class, the English upper class, had with Germany. Asquith had a German governess, while his wife, Margaret Asquith, was rumored to take gifts to the German prisoners of war. Even in July 1917, even the royal family felt obliged to adopt the English-sounding royal name, Windsor, to replace the German Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha. This move proved to be a wise one, when just a month later, Germany started dispatching their Gotha planes to bomb London. One common effect of every war, we had it in the Second World War, we also have it in the First World War, is an increased natality rate, birth rate. We mostly talk about illegitimate births in the First World War, and the reason for that was simple. The husbands were away at war, so extra marital sex was in rife, to say so, but also some other two other trends were developing: lesbianism and homosexuality. This brought about a national paranoia, according to which these latter mentioned trends corrupt the moral fiber of the nation and loosen the sexual customs, and this was dangerous. Asquith was succeeded by David Lloyd George, whose motto was simple: win the war. But unfortunately, the war only got bloodier, and the German cause gained impetus by the outbreak of the Russian Revolution, followed by the dominance of the Bolshevik regime. The German-Russian armistice allowed Germany to redirect men, and now there were fears in London that the war might be lost. In March 1918, Germany launched Ludendorff offensive, breaking through alleys and reaching South Paris. In London, there were talks and plans to evacuate the British troops, but Lloyd George's overall handling of the war was heavily criticized both in Parliament and in the army. So this attitude of defeatism, of not being able to cope with the war state, gave way to an independent MP called Noel Pemberton Billing. This is the character of our story, basically, and my God, what a story. Billing's life story is fascinating because of the multi-preoccupations he concerned himself with, but also because of the controversies he featured in. He did not shine at school and abandoned his first job to go and fight the Second Boer War in South Africa. When he returned to England, he became interested in gadgetry and started to patent several inventions, and I'll just mention three. A glider, a typewriter which could only be operated at the index finger, and a petrol-driven automatic gun. He also found time to work as a manager at Richmond Theatre and even trained as a barrister at Middle Temple. What consecrated him, however, was his dedication for aviation. He constructed the first British monoplane, that is a plane with just one wing, to make it off ground, and later joined the Royal Naval Air Service. When the war started, Britain had only 100 military aircraft at its disposal, and Billing campaigned for the ramp-up of manufacture of warplanes. This ideology helped him set foot in the political arena in 1916 when he ran as an independent on an anti-Germanism and purity in public life slogan. Throughout his parliamentary activity, Billing campaigned for a new aviation policy. He argued that British planes were poorly built and that the pilots had not simply been killed by the Germans in the war, but murdered by the British incompetence. His efforts to raise awareness led to the creation of an air ministry in 1917 and indirectly to the creation of RAF in 1918. His own political party, called the Vigilantes Society, was strongly militaristic, violently xenophobic, and directed at an all-out strategy to win the war. It also denounced, the moral degeneracy on the home front, which was severely undermining the war effort. Basically, Billing's political party was anti-government policy. Homosexuality was also heavily criticized and portrayed as a deviant sexual orientation. So, when Billing was introduced to Harold Spencer, this again is a very important name to remember for future references, who immediately became his assistant editor and who claimed to have seen a certain black book which contained the names of 47,000 sexually deviant Britons who were blackmailed by a hidden hand of Germans. Billington was eager to let the news out. He put together a magazine as well called Vigilante, under the title The First 47,000, he virulently maintained that he knows and seen a book containing the names of cabinet ministers, wives, diplomats, poets, bankers, who are all engaged in lasciviousness, lesbianism, or homosexuality. This kind of conduct, he further maintained, was infesting the country and corrupting the English pure morals. But the English government had enough of Billing's quite influential rambling and tried to stitch him up. By 1918, Maud Allen, just to remind you, she played Salome, she was an actress, was in her 40s and her career was in decline. When she was offered a lead role in a new London production of Wilde's play by G.T. Grain, a Dutch promoter of modern theatre, she jumped at the chance. Grain was aware that Salome would provoke controversy and national paranoia because of its association with Oscar Wilde, who, I remind you, was seen as the epitome of moral degeneracy. And because of this, he only organized 2 private performances to take place at the Prince of Wales Theatre. The news of the plays were advertised in Sunday Times, from where Billing picked up the information. To his obsessed mind, everything fitted into place. You had a sadistic play written by a decadent homosexual, staged by a Dutchman of German sympathies, starring a woman rumored to have had an affair with the wife of the British Prime Minister of the time. So what he did, he published an article in his magazine, in Vigilante, entitling it "The Cult of the Clitoris," a rather odd title, where he implied quite clearly that basically Maud Allen was a German conspirator. When Grain saw the article, he immediately showed it to Maud, and together commenced the proceedings for criminal and obscene libel. The offense of criminal libel, finally abolished in 2010, was back then a curious legal hybrid. Basically, the action was brought by the plaintiff, by the person who complained of the defamatory claims, in a criminal court, and the maximum sentence for that was 2 years. The word clitoris may have appeared in print, may have never appeared in print, other than in medical publication. It would seem that few Vigilante readers and even fewer members of the general public even knew the meaning of the word. A rather funny but reportedly true event occurred when, during the trial, a lord has inquired who this Greek chap, Clitoris, they were all talking about, while Bill's assistant, Spencer, later admitted that in order to find a suitable title for his article, he had to phone a local doctor to ask for the exact term for a female sex organ. But before the Old Bailey trial began, there were yet more extraordinary twists to the tale. The war was becoming critical, but the British generals were appalled by Lloyd George's handling of it, and so they organized a plot against the Prime Minister. One of the plotters was an ally of Billing, on his name Charles Repington. He was a former war correspondent who was now seeking to undermine Lloyd George in the press. The joint effort of Billing and Repington was to create an anti-German sentiment at Billing's trial, one that would ultimately sabotage peace talks being proposed. But the British government adopted their own dirty tricks against Billing. They set a honey trap for him by paying a so-called Eileen Villiers Stewart to pose as a sympathizer for Billing. She had been instructed at arm's length by the government to send Billing a letter expressing her endorsement on his puritanical life policy and enticing him out for a lunch where she would tell him things that he might very well be interested in. She lured him into a brothel in Mayfair, and a photographer was present as well, so that he would be photographed in a compromising position. But her meeting with Billing did not go according to the plan. She was so impressed by Billing's apparent sincerity and to his cause that she instantly switched allegiance. She told Billing about the secret mission concocted by the British government and agreed to help his defense while starting an affair with him as well. Noel Billing's trial started in May 1918 when he entered a plea of justification, pleading not guilty to criminal libel on the basis that all defamatory matters alleged in the indictment are true and that it was in the public interest to publish them. This trial would prove to be one of the most absurd spectacles ever seen at the Central Criminal Court, a source of cynical amusement and horror, really, to the establishment. There were large queues for the public gallery with many ardent supporters of Billing. He was truly delighted by the attention that the trial brought him and brought to his purity campaign. He had chosen to represent himself, and this aspect in particular benefited him greatly because instead of facing the dock as a defendant, he was permitted to sit in the well of the court, directly facing the jury and putting his point across as an individual battling the state rather than a defendant. For the prosecution, we had Ellis Hume Williams QC, a fervent government loyalist, and Travers Humphreys, a junior counsel who actually acted for Wilde himself at his trial for gross indecency. Like in every criminal trial, we already know this, the prosecution outlines first the case against the defendant. The only charge in this case was that of criminal libel against Maud Allen. As she arrived in court the first day in a black fur cape and in a red feather hat, little did she realize that the trial would prove to have almost no connection with her actual complaint. The prosecution then swiftly explained the meaning of the word clitoris and concluded. The words suggested Maud Allen was an unchaste and immoral woman whose performances were designed as to encourage obscene practices among women. When Maud Allen entered the witness box for the examination in chief, Billing rose to start the show. He showed to the book a court book, entitled Celebrated Criminal Cases of America, and opened it at a marked page where there was a photograph of Maud's brother. The suggestion was utterly absurd. Billing implied that because Maud's brother was a sadistic murderer, Maud herself had sadistic vices, and these sadistic vices were clearly proven by her decision to play the part of Salome in Wilde's play. Billing then exposed details about the horrific murders of Maud's brother, trying to prove that the sadism was hereditary. To this assumption, Maud just stood there in the witness box, completely lost for words. Billing then turned to Maud's connection with Germany. He focused on the fact that Maud had taken up her dance training in Berlin. This mention was very clever in that it sought to point out to the jury the ideological, the British and German ideological contrast, the difference in it. In one last final hit, he prompted Maud to recite various passages from Salome while in the dock. While the aim for this was clear, he tried to portray Maud to the jury as a lascivious, obscene, and sadistic person. In a society that had puritanical aspirations, Maud Allen, Alice Salome, represented the corruptible, the sin, and the obscene. The sin and the obscene. Day 2 of the trial began with Billing putting his case to the jury, he put it to them that it is in the public interest that this type of play must be stopped. The trial descended into absurdity when Eileen Villiers-Stewart, if you remember her, she was his mistress, told the court that she had actually seen the black book of the first 47,000. This allegation was never tested, but if we are to imagine the existence of such an important book, surely it would be closely guarded by some secret service. She further maintained that it was shown to her by two generals who are now conveniently dead while having tea somewhere in Surrey. The jury seemed to be drawn in by this sequence of sensational fabrications. When the judge finally objected to the admissibility of evidence, Billing pointed at him and thundered, "Your name is in that book, as well as Mrs. and Mr. Asquith." The judge was lost for words while the crowds in the public gallery were cheering. He had just been accused of being one of the 47,000, and yet he did nothing than gape. The next witness for the defense was Harold Spencer, who had also claimed to have seen the black book and could say for definite that the list of the 47,000 definitely included Mrs. Asquith and other official names. By this point, even the judge became interested in Spencer's evidence, who rattled on, telling the court that he had been warned that if he ever let out any news about the Black Book existence, he was at risk of assassination by a group of plotters eager to restore Asquith as Prime Minister. What followed, though, was extraordinary. Spencer blatantly suggested that he had met the prosecuting counsel at a private dinner and told him all about the German infiltration of the British Secret Service. Spencer's account was also backed by Eileen Villiers-Stewart herself, who revealed that she also met the prosecuting counsel at a different address, but for the same purpose, which is to reveal the secret about the Black Book. At these allegations, the prosecuting counsel, Hume Williams, King's Counsel, looked discombobulated, but the court descended into laughter, and by now it became clear how powerful Billing's rhetoric has been and how deranged his witnesses were. The defense has managed to ridicule the prosecution in a way which was largely discrediting. The trial has now digressed from a libel action to a denouncement of the degenerate English establishment. Billing also relied on the expert advice of a doctor who told the court that a healthy-minded person watching Salome would find it tiresome, but conversely, a person of perverted instincts would take extreme delight in the whole play. The defense's parade of witnesses ended with Lord Alfred Douglas. He was Wilde's former lover, who testified confidently, "I think Wilde had a diabolical influence on everyone he met. I think he's the greatest force for evil that has appeared in Europe the last 350 years. He was the agent of the devil in every possible way." In any normal world, this set of witness accounts would be dismissed as nonsense, but 1918 Britain was not a normal world. Paranoia prevailed over rationality, while the truth was in retreat. The impact that Eileen Villiers-Stewart had in the trial was profound and resounding, especially for the jury. She and Billing concocted a story which now put the judge, the prosecuting counsel, and other officials into a conspiracy to destroy and corrupt Britain. All that mattered was what the jury saw, and that was a solitary truth seeker being thwarted by a corrupt judge who was seemingly part of the Black Book. Rarely had so many lies been told in a courtroom under the veil of apparent sincerity, let alone in the Central Criminal Court. Billing's closing speech was a masterclass rhetoric. He was essentially aiming to free Britain from the mysterious influence undermining the war effort, but also stop Britain from becoming diseased with Wilde's cult of sodomy. The action of libel was long digressed from, with Maud Allen seen crying as she left the court that last day of trial. After 1 hour and a half of deliberation, the jury returned a not guilty verdict, which was met by a wild cheer outside the Old Bailey. Much can be read into that verdict. Was it a judgment on Maud Allen and her suggestive dancing? Was it a reaction to the influence of Oscar Wilde's play? Was the verdict the result of the state of the war effort, or was it simply an intimidation of the jury? We shall never know, but what we do know for certain is that Billing's prosecution is regarded as a spectacle which should have never taken place in a court of justice. The judge was heavily criticized for not being able to keep under control the trial, and the court scenes and fabrications seemed to resemble a madhouse. The crowds outside the Old Bailey saw Billing's acquittal as a vindication for his puritanical life campaign. A week later, he addressed a crowd of no less than 10,000 people at the Royal Albert Hall, where he promised to fight for a cleaner Britain. But his cause was quickly losing momentum after his trial, and his witnesses have all ended up in prison for reasons which had nothing to do with Billing. Eileen Villiers-Stewart was arrested for bigamy and sent to prison, and Alfred Douglas received a prison sentence as well for a criminal libel. Ultimately, Billing lost interest in politics and focused instead on various business schemes, among which a notable one is writing a futuristic play called High Treason, which imagined Britain in the 1950s during a conflict between the United States of Europe and the Empire of the Atlantic States. Billing died in 1948, utterly ignorant of the importance of being earnest and tirelessly spending decades of trying to destroy the Oscar Wilde cult. More than a century on, Oscar Wilde is a celebrated writer and playwright who would have been better understood in today's society. As of Billing, by today's standards, just a deranged attention seeker. Thank you again for your time. I hope today's trial got you thinking how paramount it is to know the past in order to have a better and more thorough understanding of the present. Thank you.